When Valdemar IV ascended to the throne of Denmark in 1340, few could have imagined that the young man would one day drag a broken kingdom back into the ranks of European powers. The Denmark he inherited barely resembled a country at all. For nearly 2 decades, foreign creditors, German counts, Hanseatic nobles, and opportunistic warlords had carved the land into pieces, each ruling their own small dominion. The Danish crown had become a memory, a relic crushed under debt, rebellion, and humiliation. Yet, from the chaos of these kingless times, a single figure emerged with the ambition, ruthlessness, and political intelligence to attempt what no one else dared: to rebuild Denmark from scratch. To understand Valdemar's rise, we must step back to the early 13th century. Denmark, once strong under previous kings, had been devastated by poor leadership and constant war under King Erik VI. His death in 1319 without an heir triggered a collapse. The nobles elected his brother Christopher II as king only because they expected him to be weak. They were right. Christopher agreed to a humiliating coronation charter limiting royal powers, and, unable to raise taxes, he began mortgaging vast parts of Denmark to German creditors. Land, castles, ports, everything had a price, and the creditors were eager to buy. By the time Christopher died in 1332, Denmark was effectively dissolved. No successor was crowned. Instead, German lords ruled almost everything. Jutland belonged to Gerhard III of Holstein-Rendsburg, Zealand was controlled by John III of Holstein-Plön, and Scania had been absorbed by Sweden. Local Danish nobles were powerless, peasants overtaxed, and trade suffocated. Bandits roamed freely. For 8 years, Denmark existed only as a memory. But in 1340, a desperate act changed everything. Niels Ebbesen, a Danish noble, broke into the quarters of Count Gerhard III during the night and killed him in his bed. Though Ebbesen was later killed in battle, the assassination shattered German control. With their greatest creditor gone, Danish nobles seized the moment to restore the monarchy. They chose 20-year-old Valdemar, son of the disgraced Christopher II. Many believed he could be controlled just like his father. They could not have been more mistaken. Valdemar understood the situation far better than his enemies expected. He recognized that Denmark could not be restored through goodwill or diplomacy alone. It needed strong leadership, decisive action, and, above all, money. His first move was a political masterstroke. He married Helwig of Schleswig, securing both legitimacy and a valuable dowry. North Jutland, included in the dowry, immediately strengthened his position. Though he imposed heavy taxes on the region, prompting anger among the peasants, Valdemar had little choice. The treasury was empty. The kingdom needed cash to buy back mortgaged lands and raise armies. Valdemar's first strategic priority was Zealand, the historical heart of Danish power. Whoever controlled Zealand controlled Denmark. Its towns, Roskilde, Koinge, and the growing hub of Copenhagen were vital for trade and taxation. Moreover, Zealand's position between Jutland and Scania made it the essential bridge for national reunification. If Valdemar could retake it, he would regain the crown's symbolic and practical center. Between 1341 and 1346, Valdemar moved with relentless determination. He reconquered Kalundborg and Soborg fortresses. He defeated a Swedish Holstein coalition at the Battle of Blidebro in 1342. Then, in a move that shocked many, he sold distant Danish Estonia to the Teutonic Order in 1346. The sale was deeply unpopular, but it gave Valdemar something he desperately needed: 19,000 silver marks. With that money, he bought back more of Denmark, piece by piece, including the final Holstein stronghold on Zealand. By late 1346, the island was his. With Zealand secure, Valdemar turned to Fune. Within a year, his hired mercenaries captured Nyborg Castle, bringing most of the island into his authority. In just 7 years, the young king had regained control of the core of Denmark through a mix of force, negotiation, and calculated sacrifice. But conquest was only the first step. Valdemar introduced new systems of governance to prevent the chaos that had destroyed his father's reign. He appointed loyal officials rather than relying on powerful nobles, centralized justice, reformed taxation, and stabilized the currency. Copenhagen and Viborg grew, trade revived, and royal authority took root once again. Just as Denmark began to rise, disaster struck. The Black Death arrived in 1350. Like the rest of Europe, Denmark was ravaged. Entire villages disappeared, trade collapsed, and shortages plagued the countryside. But Valdemar, ever the strategist, saw opportunity even in catastrophe. With many landowners dead, the crown acquired more land than ever before. By mid-decade, Denmark emerged stronger than many neighbors. With internal consolidation complete, Valdemar set his gaze outward. The Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of German merchant cities, dominated Baltic trade. Their fleets controlled commerce from Novgorod to London. At the heart of their network lay the Øresund Strait, and now Valdemar controlled half of it. The Hanseatic League saw Denmark's resurgence as a threat. Valdemar saw the League's wealth as an opportunity. The first conflict erupted in 1358 over trade rights and taxation. Though resolved temporarily, Valdemar knew war with the Hanseatic League was inevitable. To win it, he needed complete control over the Baltic choke points. That meant retaking Scania and then conquering Gotland, the greatest prize of all. And in 1861, Valdemar made his move. Valdemar's fleet landed on Gotland in July 1361, and the campaign began with terrifying efficiency. The local militias, mostly poorly armed farmers and townsmen, tried to block the Danes before they reached Visby. What followed was one of the most lopsided battles in Scandinavian history. Valdemar's trained soldiers, many of them hardened German mercenaries, cut through the Gotlander militia with overwhelming force. Hundreds fell in a single day. The fields outside Visby were littered with the bodies of men who had never stood a chance. But the people of Visby, wealthy but pragmatic, saw the futility of resistance. Instead of letting their city burn, they surrendered quietly. Valdemar imposed a crushing tribute: 3 enormous chests filled with silver, gold, jewels, and precious metals. Chroniclers describe the tax as so heavy that merchant families stripped their homes, emptied their vaults, and pulled ornaments from churches to meet the king's demands. Only after taking this vast wealth did Valdemar formally take control of the island. The fall of Visby sent shockwaves across Scandinavia and the Baltic world. Valdemar had just dealt a humiliating blow to one of the Hanseatic League's most important cities. The League, already uneasy about his rise, now saw him as a direct threat. With Scania and Gotland under Danish control, Valdemar stood at the peak of his power. Denmark had not only been restored, it had become a major Baltic power again, something no one had thought possible just a decade earlier. But Valdemar's triumph triggered a storm he could not ignore.
The Hanseatic League was not merely a collection of merchant towns. It was a military and economic powerhouse with fleets, fortresses, and enormous financial resources. Outraged by the conquest of Visby, the League formed a coalition against Denmark. Sweden, too, sought revenge for its losses. The stage was set for one of the most significant conflicts in Northern Europe, the First Danish Hanseatic War. In 1362, the League launched attacks against Danish shipping, seizing vessels and blocking trade routes. Valdemar retaliated aggressively, raiding Hanseatic towns along the southern Baltic coast. But although he won some early victories, the conflict began to drag on. The League's naval forces were powerful and well organized. Each year of war strained Denmark's economy, even as the king demanded new taxes to fund his campaigns. Merchants complained, nobles grumbled, and rival factions began to grow restless. Then came an unexpected blow. In 1364, Sweden elected Albrecht of Mecklenburg as its new king. He was young, ambitious, and fully prepared to reclaim Scania and challenge Danish influence. With Sweden revitalized and the Hanseatic League determined to cripple Denmark, Valdemar found himself surrounded by enemies. By the late 1360s, the coalition was closing in. The League's fleets blockaded key harbors. Swedish forces pushed toward Scania. Even Norway grew nervous, realizing that the balance of power in the north was shifting in unpredictable ways. Valdemar, who had once seemed unstoppable, now faced the greatest crisis of his reign. In 1367, the Hanseatic League formed the powerful Confederation of Cologne, an alliance of nearly 60 cities, specifically to defeat Denmark. Their combined strength forced Valdemar into negotiations. The resulting agreement, the Treaty of Stralsund in 1370, was a painful defeat. The League gained control over key trade rights in Denmark and secured enormous influence over the Øresund. Visby remained technically under Danish authority, but its wealth and independence were gone. Yet even in defeat, Valdemar managed something remarkable. He kept the kingdom intact. Unlike the collapse of 1332, Denmark did not dissolve. The monarchy survived, the core territories remained secure, and the institutions Valdemar built continued to function. The price was high, but the nation he had rebuilt was strong enough to withstand even a coalition of the most powerful economic force in the Baltic world. After the Treaty of Stralsund, Valdemar's political energy waned. He spent more time abroad, visiting courts in Germany, negotiating alliances, and strengthening diplomatic ties. Some saw this as neglect of Denmark. Others believed it was a strategic attempt to ease tensions and restore trust across the Baltic world. But one thing was clear. Valdemar had become a respected figure in European politics. Kings listened to him, merchants feared him, and neighboring rulers never forgot how quickly he had turned a shattered Denmark into a formidable power. When Valdemar IV died in 1375, he left behind a kingdom fundamentally transformed. Denmark was no longer a bankrupt, dismembered collection of territories run by foreign creditors. It was a centralized, organized, and increasingly prosperous nation with a functioning royal administration. The crown held more land than it had in decades. The economy was recovering from war, but rested on newly restored foundations. Towns like Copenhagen, which had gained importance under Valdemar, would soon become the center of Denmark's political future. But one challenge remained. Valdemar had no surviving sons. His death triggered a succession crisis. However, the stronger monarchy he built ensured that Denmark did not collapse as it had under his father. Instead, the nobles elected Olaf II as king, with Valdemar's daughter Margaret serving as regent. Margaret, known to history as Margaret I, would later unify Denmark, Norway, and Sweden into the Kalmar Union, one of the greatest political achievements in Scandinavian history. And none of it would have been possible without Valdemar IV.